All right. Well, we are very, very lucky today to be joined by Jay Dobyns. Now, Jay, I'm going to do my best here to cut your background or your career down into a couple of sentences here, but I'm going to be doing you a disservice because if you take a read through your books, you clearly understand all of the different things that you've been involved with. And the one thing I learned reading through your books is that if there was trouble to be found in the U.S. and help that was needed, you were quite often there. So I'm going to try and cut this down in the interest of time. But again, I'm really doing you a disservice here trying to cut down your background. But you worked as a United States federal agent for approximately 27 years. You are best known for going undercover with the Hells Angels, which we're going to talk about. Jay is the author of two best-selling books, No Angel, My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels, and Catching Hell, A True Story of Abandonment and Betrayal. I've read both of these books, and again, I would highly recommend both of them. They go through Jay's career, especially the second one, and they take you through the full gambit on the emotional scale. You're going to be laughing at some points, and you're going to be crying on other points, which is not that easy to achieve in a book. Over and above that, Jay was a very, very good college football player. He was a high school football coach and is an adjunct professor at the University of Arizona. So it's quite the background. Now, the way I'm going to start with this, Jay, is actually a list that was put together, but I think one of your friends there in Arizona, Javier Morales, and what Javier put together was the top 10 badasses in Arizona football history. And when I first heard this list, I'm thinking to myself, what sort of gimmicky list is this that Javier put together? And then I saw the list, Jay, and I'm going to steal one of your terms. There's some pipe hitters on this list, to say the least. So if you're fans of the NFL, here are some of the folks that are on this list of the top 10 badasses in Arizona football history. Number 10, Nick Foles, a quarterback in the NFL. I'm sure a lot of people know who Nick Foles is. Number 7, Rob Gronkowski. If you're a fan of the New England Patriots, I'm sure you know who Rob Gronkowski is. But you don't just have to be a fan of the Patriots. He participated in several Super Bowls. You probably know Rob Gronkowski very well. Number 4 is actually another former New England Patriot in Teddy Bruschi. But the number 1 badass in Arizona football history is none other than yours truly, Jay freaking Dobyns. The number 1 badass in Arizona football history. And the way I'm going to describe it, there's a quote here from your coach of your college football team, Larry Smith. Here's how Coach Smith describes Mr. Jay Dobyns. This is Coach Smith. This is his quote. Every Saturday, a kid who barely weighs 170 pounds dripping wet goes over the middle for us. I know this Jay is a tough, reckless son of a bitch. After games, he looked like he's been run over by a train. I personally think he enjoys taking the defense's best shot just so he can get up and laugh at them. And you might say to yourself, well, why am I starting with Jay's football career in Arizona? And the reason being is because I think, and again, you get this reading through Jay's book, is that the way Jay approached life on the football field was the same way that Jay approached life as a federal agent, or frankly anything else that he did. You know, when I myself would see trouble coming up in the street, I would be turning the other way and running away from it. However, when it comes to Jay Dobyns, Jay sees trouble down the street, and Jay starts to make a beeline straight directly for it because he's trying to help people and help things out. And that's, again, not only how Jay approached life on the football field, but also how Jay approached life as an ATF agent and all the other things he did. So, Jay, just to reiterate, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. It's an honor, frankly, to speak with you. But maybe let's just start with the beginning. Is why did you join the ATF to begin with? What was your interest in law enforcement?
Well, I think you hit it on the head with that introduction. Thank you for that. I'm not sure I deserve that much flattery, but I do appreciate the kind words. Like Javier and his brother Andy, when they put that top 10 list together, I'm not sure that was so much my performance on the athletic field as a football player as it was just the totality of who I ultimately became. And I've been reckless in a lot of ways. I was reckless as a football player. I conducted my law enforcement career in probably a reckless manner. That's not always a flattering statement to make about a lawman, being reckless. My risk assessment probably wasn't always the best, but that recklessness took me to the places that I ended up going. So for all of us, not just for me, for any of us, when we see something wrong in the world, do something about it. Step into it. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be an observer. Can you make an impact? Can you change someone's life? Can you improve things? Those are good objectives to have. And that was ultimately what led me into law enforcement, is that, I took a badge and a gun, and I was immensely honored to be asked to stand up against the predators for the good and innocent people in my community. And I took that very serious. I took it to heart. It was important to me.
And why did you choose the ATF? You could have probably chosen a number of different law enforcement agencies. The ATF clearly, probably higher energy, higher risk, all that sort of stuff. Your edge of the tip of the spear type of stuff where you're talking about, firearms and explosives. Why the ATF? What was the allure of the ATF?
I knew I wanted to work undercover. I wanted to at least try it to see if I could do it, if I was any good at it. And ATF still has the premier undercover program in federal law enforcement. So it was a very natural fit for me.
You mentioned undercover. Like, why would you choose undercover? Did you know that early that this was something that you would be interested in? Like, why undercover, at least so early on in your life cycle?
I felt that it fit my personality. And it played to some extent into my recklessness.
Okay.
The role of an undercover is to obtain evidence of a crime, like guns, narcotics, bombs, other intelligence and information, help build cases that lead to arrests and convictions. It's really hard to do when you arrive cold as a stranger and you're trying to convince paranoid, sometimes violent criminals to let you in on their crime schemes. There's a huge challenge to it. There's nothing easy about it. It wasn't easy for me.
Yeah.
There's different types of undercovers that I've found just through, not through science, just through participation and observation. There's naturals who are just that they're inherently negotiators. They're always negotiating. That's their personality. There's the actor types who assume a character and assume a role and then play that out. There's like a conformist type that kind of blends those. They learn to negotiate. They learn to fit in. They play a role. That's probably the style that I was. The one thing that all these different types of undercovers have, the one common denominator is that they're audacious. There's a saying within the Special Forces community, and those Special Forces operators, those soldiers, those military people, they are our very best fighting machines. They are true warriors. And they have a saying that says, get off the X. And get off the X means get out of that danger zone. For an undercover, it's very different than that. We're trying to get on the X. We're trying to get there and stay there for as long as we can and do it with flamboyance. It's hard to do, and not everybody can do it. Not everybody should do it. Undercover is a tool within an investigator's toolbox, and there's all different ways to investigate a case. In my opinion, my biased opinion, undercover is the best technique because you're taking a living, breathing, human, trained law enforcement asset and you're inserting them into the middle of a crime scene. And then you're able to take that person and bring them out, and they ultimately report on what they saw, touched, smelled, heard, participated in. And then they can testify before a jury and before a judge. Now, with that, you're taking a big risk because you're taking a human, a living asset, and putting him in harm's way. But it's, in my opinion, it's still the best way to investigate a case.
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about your book is, you might think, whoa, yeah, like you say, operate on the X, and there's an element of risk, high risk associated with that, but there's also the impact on your family and yourself and the way when you got into describing, a typical day working undercover, it's not the movies, right? Like it is like wake up first thing in the morning, you've got your day job, high stress undercover, and then at night it's filling out reports and everything like that, and then there's alcohol and this and that just to kind of keep it going. Like it's just the toll that it would take would be tremendous, right? Like it's craziness.
Well, I came into it with this Miami Vice Hollywood created vision of what undercover was. You had Sonny Crockett, and he's driving around South Beach in a Ferrari, and he's wearing a Hugo Boss suit, and he's meeting with drug kingpins, and there's supermodels bringing him mojitos, and I had this vision entering that world that undercover was sexy and it was glamorous and it smelled like South Beach. It smelled like hibiscus flowers, right? Once I got in, I realized that it wasn't sexy and it wasn't glamorous. It's a nasty, dirty, bloody, vomit-covered scab of a life.
Yeah.
When I realized the truth, I loved it. I loved it every day. I loved it when my alarm clock went off. Your heart is pounding 1,000,000 miles an hour, but your hand can't shake. The challenge of that. It takes a truly unique person to knowingly step into a criminal's gun sights and then conduct yourself with comfort and confidence. There's some people, like I was never the best undercover agent. There's a dozen guys that I know that I admire who I believe are better at it than I was. But I learned from them. I questioned them. I studied them. And I tried to mimic them. And ultimately, all those friends and peers and mentors and associates helped me accomplish what I accomplished and form ultimately who I was, who I became.
And I know you've talked about this a bunch, but it didn't start off very well. And it almost started off like like some form of a horror movie, frankly. Is you started on a Monday and you were nearly killed on a Thursday. And the way you describe this in the book is, I think, a blood gushing out of you like a hose. On a Thursday. Maybe can you just link those together? Like that just seems almost unreal that things could progress. Like in my world, we train for a month before we're allowed to touch anything. And this is in an accounting world where I certainly can't blow anything up. I'm now, but you start on a Monday and are lying in a hospital bed on Thursday.
Yeah, 4 days on the job, I was taken hostage. I was shot in the back, point blank. The bullet went through my lung. It narrowly missed my heart. It exited my chest. And I'm laying in the dirt and garbage of a trailer park, surrounded by single-wide trailers with aluminum awnings hanging off of them and cars on blocks and rusted-out swing sets. And there's a big pool of blood growing around me. Blood was coming out of my chest like you're holding your thumb over the end of a garden hose. With the feds, we get paid every 2 weeks. I hadn't gotten a paycheck yet. I comped them that one. That was on the house. But it goes back to your introduction and to that badass list is that no one's coming to save you. You're going to get knocked down. This is just life. Life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% what we choose to do about it, how we choose to react to it. I learned a lot of that on the football field. I got the dog piss knocked out of me every Saturday afternoon and all during the week at practice too. I was never a remarkable athlete. I was never the biggest or the fastest or the strongest or the quickest. I had to find ways to survive through that, to achieve anything. I translated those football experiences, those life experiences into what I did as a federal agent. So
that Monday you start, Thursday you're nearly killed. Obviously, then you need to go through some recovery. You chose to stick with the ATF. What you don't talk about in your, again on your interviews, but you go into detail in your book is your next stop. Your next stop, if I believe I've got this right, is you go to Chicago, and things don't get any better in Chicago. Like you're almost taken out by your own players in like corrupt police, and you were almost at the end of the line there. You describe a situation in your book after a certain operation where you're walking back. Could barely walk, and your buddy picks you up, and it's just like, we got to keep doing it. And again, stopped on the side of the road by, supposedly the good guys, the police officers, but one of the guys just happens to be extremely corrupt. And if he didn't get, stopped or arrested effectively, and who knows what things would have, but when you went to Chicago, things didn't get any better. If anything, things got worse.
In a way, but I learned so much there. And you referenced the shooting I was in Chicago. My partner there, an ATF agent named Chris Bayless, who is one of those dozen guys that mentored me and helped me and that I admire, who was in that shooting with me. Like surrounding myself with great people. We don't accomplish anything by ourselves in law enforcement, in life for that matter. There's always people that touch us and impact us. Chris Bayless was one of those people for me that helped save my life that day. We got in a shootout in Joliet with some gangbangers after an undercover deal, and ultimately I was run over by a car by the escaping suspects and got in a shootout, shot the driver of the car as it ran me over, and turned into a vehicle chase, which Chris was the hero of. And so I guess the big picture, like sports, like the achievements in sports, like the achievements on the football field, I had great people around me that helped me be the very best I could be.
Was there a point there, though, where you said, you know what, like, first stop, nearly killed on a Thursday, second stop, not going much better. Maybe I need to have a change in career path here. Maybe I got to do something different. What did that go through your head, and what sort of kept you in the ATF at that point?
Well, after that first shooting, and being brand new on the job, being inexperienced and untrained, I had liability attorneys lining up, trying to get me to take the buyout. I had attorneys saying, how much money do you want? You want $1 million? You want $5 million? Tell me how many zeros you want on the check. I can get it for you. I didn't want to hear about that. That's not why. There's no cop in the world that ever took a badge and a gun for the money. There's other reasons to become a lawman or a lawwoman. I felt like I had a purpose. I felt like this is how I was ultimately going to make a difference, and the money was never a factor. Like trying to escape it because I had some hard times never factored in. You have to fight through the tough times in life. Not everything is going to be smooth or easy or fun. You have to battle through those to find the fun, easy, pleasant, fulfilling times in anything we do.
And we talked a little bit about what drew you into undercover. What kept you in undercover at that point, Jay? Again, some of the stuff arose obviously because you're going into, like you say, living on that X, which is inherently dangerous. Did you ever consider, say, you know what, maybe I should get out of undercover work and actually do something that, because again, it's one thing to say money's one thing, but you were talking about your life as well. Like this is high risk, these are high risk endeavors where if the bullet was, 1 inch the other way, maybe it's ending completely different. If that car was, 1 foot, in a different spot, like again, did it ever occur to you to say, you know what, maybe, the undercover stuff is just a little bit too risky?
All those things that you mentioned are what drew me in more and brought me closer to it. Whether that was, good or bad or whether there was, other factors involved in it, it was what I did. And whatever I've done, I've always tried to be great. I don't think I ever reached greatness. I always strived for perfection. I was never perfect. I was never great at anything that I've done. But I think probably if I had a superpower, it was that I was willing. As a football player, I was willing. I was willing to run slants. I was willing to go over the middle. I was willing to do my part, which was unglamorous, to help my team. That translated, into my life as an ATF agent. I was always willing. When someone needed help, when someone came to me and said, hey, can you participate? Can you bring your undercover skills to this case? I always said yes. I never stopped to assess what the chance of success was, what the risk was. Someone needed help, and if they came to me, I wanted to be an active participant in that. I didn't want to be a passive observer in anything.
And the other thing in your books is you talk a lot about, like you mentioned, several of your coworkers who were also undercover agents. And from your perspective, Jay, what are the kind of key or the core personality traits that you need to have in order to be an undercover? Because again, go through your book and clearly operating on the X, as you've indicated, is high stress, all of that stuff, high danger. There's only a few people that have, the mental wherewithal in order to do it. And you look at some of the pictures, you've got a lot of pictures in your books. You would never, these are not people with like movie star good looks, and they just seem to be able to do their job extremely well in being an undercover. What are those key characteristics of being an undercover that leads some of those guys to be, like yourself, really successful at what they do?
I think I touched on it earlier. I think one of the common denominators is they're audacious. They're risk-aggressive people. That they're all comfortable and confident. And I've never been able to figure out which one came first or what led to the other. Is it a confident person that then is able to assume this false persona and present it comfortably and believably? or are they just people who are so comfortable in that role that they portray themselves with confidence and are able to convince, uniquely paranoid people? There's the criminal community is paranoid, and they're paranoid for a very good reason. That paranoia, that suspicion, keeps them out of jail. It keeps them out of prison. So it's very difficult as an undercover operative to insert yourself into those crime scenes and then convince a stranger to believe in you, to trust you, to build their loyalty. Sometimes you build love, and then ultimately you end up betraying that. And that is that's not how we're built as human beings, to set people up. Deception and the use of lies, it's just not how God made us. But there's a mission behind it. It's a sanctioned, court-sanctioned, approved technique. The use of deception is an important part of law enforcement.
Yeah. Did the ATF have a training program for, this is how you go about being an undercover, or did you kind of just learn from, again, your superiors and your coworkers, and you kind of pick the stuff up along the way? Like where did it land? Which was it, learning on the job, or there was like actually a formal training process and maybe even some psychological testing to say, can this person even deal with it? Because I'm guessing that the burnout rate would be quite high on this type of role.
All the above. Yes, we do psychological evaluations of our undercovers. We train in our academy. We get a taste of undercover work. We get exposed to it. We have in-service training where we're trying to reinforce those skills. But ultimately, it's trial by fire.
Yeah.
Like in our training, we do a really great job of creating scenarios for the trainees, for the students, practical exercises. And we do a good job of bringing them very, very close to reality and creating problems. And then, like anything in the world, you have a problem in front of you. What is your solution? And we rehearse those things. But ultimately, you've got to get out there and get your boots on the ground to learn it. And you make mistakes, and you try to fix those mistakes, learn from them. When you do something right, you try to replicate it.
The other point I'm interested in, and again, you talk a lot about it in your book, is maintaining a dual personality. At one point in your book, obviously you're married with kids. That's sort of one part of your lifestyle. And in the other part of your lifestyle, you're in this super high risk situation with the Hells Angels, trying to live their lifestyle. How do you maintain that dual personality? Like, is that even something that you can even maintain over the long run? Because I would have thought trying to be one person for part of the week and then another person, let's say on the weekends, I don't know how that works. I don't see, and I can just see that being incredibly challenging with your family.
Well, this is not a flattering statement of myself. I worked undercover and played this character that I built for so long. I portrayed myself as a debt collector, as a gun runner, at times as a contract killer. I played that role for so long that what I did for a living started becoming who I was. And when that happens, that's dangerous. That's not a flattering statement to make of myself. A story I think that encapsulates that, I'd spent an extended amount of time away from home on an operation. And I came home, I walked in the door, and I was just who I believed I was.
Yeah.
My wife said, "You cannot be gone and walk in this house and speak to me and the kids like we're gangsters." And then in my self-defense, I was like, I cannot turn this on and off. I am not a light switch. I have to stay on. People that treat what I do as a hobby or as a gimmick end up hurt or dead. And then her response was, I understand that, but when you come to this house, you better install a dimmer switch and dial that attitude down. And if you can't do that, don't come back. You're not welcome here. That's, I put a huge amount of battle damage on my family, on my wife and my kids and my friends. And I regret that. I live with the regret and shame of the person I became. But I think it's probably more important, to be not necessarily who we are, but who we want to be. So I'm striving now, in retirement, having left the job, to be closer to who I want to be and not who I was.
Yeah, well, the other thing you realize in your book is that your wife is an angel, Jay. I don't know how you found her, but she is very, very impressive. And again, for her to be able to deal with everything, it takes a very special person to be able to deal with all of that. You're clearly very lucky to have her by your side, because when you go in there and say, hey, honey, I'm going out on a Monday. I've got this, this good-looking blonde that I've got to pretend is my girlfriend for 5 days a week, and I've got to sell it to the Hells Angels, which I could imagine would have its challenges. I'll be back maybe on Friday after partying all week. I'll try and cut the grass, and then the whole thing starts again on Monday. For your wife to deal with all of that, Jay, is she's a pretty special person.
Well, Gwen is the hero of my story. I'm not a hero. I've worked alongside heroes. I've rubbed shoulders with heroes. I know what a hero looks like. I'm no hero. Gwen is a hero. There was 1,000 different times where I should have came home and found all my belongings on the front yard in the locks. I've made a million mistakes in my life. I've done a million things wrong. But Gwen, God, my friends, my kids have given me 1,000,001 second chances to try to get it right. My biggest regret in life, my biggest regret from my career and the way I conducted myself was that the people that loved me the most, the people that were the most loyal to me, are the ones that I took for granted and treated the shittiest. That's a humiliating statement to make, but if I'm not transparent with you in this conversation, if I'm not honest with you about my mistakes, then I'm counterfeit. If all I do is tell hero stories and glory stories, then I'm not being honest and transparent, and it takes away the credibility from anything else. That's a humiliating thing to say about yourself. But it is. But the reality is the nature of your job required some of this. Again, I'm sure a lot of people listening have watched the show Donnie Brasco. And Donnie Brasco is based on a true story. Joe Pistone, who went deep undercover with the mafia. And a lot of what you're describing happened in the movie. And you could see how, with Joe Pistone, that maintaining that dual personality was almost impossible. What you're describing is almost a function of the role as opposed to anything to do with you. You know what I mean? That I don't, again, can a human actually pretend to be two different people in operating on an X, Monday to Friday, and then Saturday or Sunday? I think the answer to that question is absolutely not. So you could only have, I don't know how you do the job for more than a year or two, because after that, again, it's just going to all fall apart. You know what I mean? That it's a function of the job as opposed to any sort of character flaw that undercover such as yourself would have. Because again, what they're asking for is almost an impossibility, right? That's how after reading your book, Jay, that's what I thought. Yeah, Joe Pistone, Donnie Brasco is a good friend of mine. He's one of those guys that I looked up to. He did it better than I did it. I wanted to try to replicate Joe. I was just never able to. I was never able to reach that level of some of these guys that I admire, the Chris Baylesses, the Joe Pistones, Jackie Garcia, Billy Queen, Bob Musella, Bob Delaney. I could go on and on and on about these historical figures, Dom Polifrone, over and over and over, these people that I looked up to, that are truly on the Mount Rushmore of undercover agents. I never made it to that level. I tried. I just wasn't good enough. It comes back to football. I tried as hard as I could. I wasn't able to get to the top. It wasn't for a lack of effort or desire. It just, I never quite made it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is dealing with stress. I know, we exchanged a couple emails leading into this, and one of the names that I dropped with you was Chris Mathers. And Chris was actually one of the first guests on this show way back when. Chris is known as kind of the human chameleon up here in Canada. He went undercover with the DEA, and I remember asking Chris. I said, Chris, I don't know how you deal with the stress. I said, I'm sure you guys plan these operations, and everything's all thought out. And I said, if you take 100 operations, I'm going to assume that like 99 of them go well, and like the one that goes off the rails, like how do you deal with that? And Chris said to me, he's like, well, Scott, it's actually the reverse. We plan these things as best we can, but 99 of these things go off the rails, and we're lucky if one of these things actually goes according to plan, which means you've got to think on the spot. And again, the stress in that I can imagine would be through the stratosphere. How do you deal with the stress? Like how do you put the stress aside and just not let it affect you?
I think I fed off the stress. I think the stress empowered me. It keeps you on point. It keeps your focus. You can't relax. You don't get a day off. I think there's probably a pretty good baseball analogy to undercover work. If you're batting .250, you're going to play every day. If you're batting .300, you're in the All-Star game. If you bat .400, you're in the Hall of Fame. Now, there was a point in time in my career where I was batting .900 or .1,000. Every time I went out, I was getting a hit, and I was hitting home runs in the process. But there's times when you strike out too.
Well, so you lead into you lead into the stress. What about the fear? Because to articulate the fear is that there's situations where you're going into these undercover arrangements wearing a wire, and you don't know. Perhaps the Hells Angels, decide on that day at that time to do some sort of a strip search. And I can imagine if that were to happen, obviously it's not going to end very well for you. How do you deal with the fear? Is it the same thing as the stress that you're going to lean into it? Because any of these situations can go off the rails at any particular time.
Yeah, I think fear is part of the job. I think if there's anybody who did what I did for a living and said that they were never afraid, man, I don't think I've crossed paths with that person. You're making real-time life and death decisions. A lot of times what you say next, what you do next, determines whether you live or die. I've had guns held to my head, and my fingers start creeping towards my gun, and the suspect is like, see if you can outdraw a trigger squeeze. You think, I've got a gun held to your head. You think you're going to outdraw me? Now, you better have a solution for that.
And do you think about that in advance? Like when you go into these situations, do you try and, think about how different scenarios could unfold and what you would do in that situation? The one situation you've talked about is when the person had looked at your business card and saw the little pinhole in it. And that, maybe just tell the story. Like, Do you try and game plan these things out, or is it all just think on the spot? Like it is, it is game on, and you're just trying to think on the spot.
So some of it is a mental preparation for bad situations, bad events, for things to spin out of control. We try to train through some of it, but a lot of it is just your mental and emotional preparation, your makeup for, like, you have to anticipate things not going well. When they do go well, you're ahead of the power curve.
Yeah.
We have cover teams. We're out there operating, and there's people listening to a wire, listening to a transmitter. Sometimes the electronics fail. Sometimes your cover team loses you. They don't know where you're at. They don't hear what's going on. Like I said earlier, my mentality was no one is coming to save me. Although there were people out there, I had cover teams, like highly professional SWAT operators, that would come in and, if things broke bad, try to resolve the situation. But in my mind, I always felt that cover team was going to do nothing more than gain some retribution for my murder and hose my brains off the porch. I had to figure it out myself.
Well, like you said, if somebody's holding a gun to your head, like the cover team is not going to be able to help, right? Like you said, they'll help at the end by avenging, your fate effectively. But there's no, like, is there really, like, you're just out there alone? Like presumably these cover teams really can't be that close. And I would guess as well that, again, it's not like you're in a big open field. You're in these buildings with locked doors and other people. Like, they just can't go storming in. It would be a process to even just get in. That's a pretty scary situation.
Well, my friend Billy Queen, one of my mentors, wrote a book called Under and Alone about his undercover experiences. And I thought the title of his book was perfect. You're under, and you truly are alone, because you're on the point, and that there are people supporting you. There are people out there to help you. There are people out there, working to protect you and keep you safe. But you're on the point. And you better be ready to figure out some bad situations really quickly.
And the one thing that I was thinking about is, does it cross their minds to say, look, let's say you're in there with the Hells Angels or whomever it may be, and they figure out that you're wearing a wire. Does it cross their mind to say, you know what, as a Hells Angel, I'm probably not going to kill an ATF agent, because that's probably not going to end well for me. You know what I mean? If you go and do that, or is that not what they're thinking? Will emotions just take over and that'll be the end of you?
I never felt like a last resort of saying, don't kill me, I'm a cop. I never felt like that was the play. I never got to that situation myself. I think ultimately, worst comes to worst, that probably would have been an argument. But you're dealing with people who are inherently violent anyways.
Yeah.
And so, someone feels like they're being deceived or lied to or set up, and that emotion of being betrayed, it's unpredictable. Someone finds a wire on you, man, you're going to get a baseball bat on the head, or you're going to get a straight razor dragged across your throat. They're going to ask questions afterwards. And so there potentially is no afterwards.
Yeah. Well, did you have an answer for that? Like, if you're sitting there wearing the wire, are you thinking to yourself, if they catch me, this is what I'm going to say?
Well, when we went through our training when I was a young agent, I had an experienced instructor. We're trying to find solutions. We're trying to find answers to these unanswerable questions.
Yeah. And
one of the comments that he made is, he said, if you ever get discovered with a wire, you can always say that your personal attorney told you to record all your conversations to protect yourself. That's not going to fly. That's not going to work. Man, like, you get found with a transmitter strapped to you with a microphone and an antenna duct taped to your chest. You're fucked.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it makes it certainly makes sense that they know the other thing too that really surprised me is that these Hells Angels and these people you're dealing with, they are very smart people. Like, these are not stupid people. You're not just going to be able to pull the wool over their eyes. These are highly intelligent people who know the game, right? Like, that's who you're up against. These are not stupid people who, don't know what they're doing. These are smart people, highly intelligent people who, like you say, are constantly paranoid.
When I was operating with the Hells Angels, you hit it on the head. They're very smart, and they're very street smart. They understand the game, and you're entering their world. They're not coming to your world. You're playing the game by their rules. The Hells Angels, these guys they're some of the most badass cats on the planet. They have their PhDs in violence and intimidation. It's a very, very dangerous game to play. And they, if they determine that they don't believe you or that you're tricking them, there's only bad consequences for that.
Yeah, and especially, you mix in alcohol and drugs, and I'm sure, again, people are not thinking rationally about it's just going to be emotion that takes over, and like you say, it's not going to be good.
Well, Scott, you know what? In the Hells Angels case, when I was presented the opportunity to lead the undercover operation in that, I started doing my research. I was never a biker investigator. I had a head start in that investigation because I had a reputation established in the criminal community that allowed us to skip a few steps ahead. But one of the things that I learned in my research is that they kill their own.
Yeah.
That they kill their own members if they feel like they're being compromised. And that was always in the back of my head.
Now, before you got to the Hells Angels, one of the more funnier parts of your second book, Jay, was you talking about the militiamen. And I guess the way I would describe it is, you go undercover for the militiamen, and it's kind of, training ground to some degree on what the Hells Angels then would bring after that. Because I really enjoyed that the chapter you got in there about the militiamen is like one of the funniest. The stories you've got in that book about the militiamen are hilarious, Jay. Like, is absolutely must read. That's why I'm saying that second book. You got to read the second book because you got to read this chapter on the militiamen. Give us some perspective. Who are the militiamen?
Well, let me reset that just a little bit. When the Hells Angels case started, I'd already had 15 years of undercover experience.
Wow.
I bought guns from Saturday Night Specials to shoulder launch rockets. I bought bombs from homemade PVC pipe bombs to servo-activated remote control C4 devices. I'd bought narcotics from dime bags and 8 balls to cartel-level dope. I'd infiltrated home invasion crews and worked on murder-for-hire cases. So, I responded now. I was not on the point for the Rodney King L.A. riots. I responded to the ATF's raid on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
Responded to the Columbine High School massacre. I'd seen some of these historical violent events, in our country's existence, in our history. So in April of 1995, Timothy McVeigh sets off his car bomb in front of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And there's, I'm not sure if I have the numbers entirely accurate, but I think 168 people are killed. 19 babies were killed in the daycare center.
It's crazy. Terrible.
It was the worst domestic terrorism event we'd experienced. Our country, our nation was in shock.
Yep.
McVeigh had associates in the southern tip of Nevada, in the Las Vegas area, and the northwest corner of Arizona. One of his associates, Terry Nichols, who helped him design the device and put the plan together. He had another associate, named Michael Fortier, who lived in Kingman, Arizona. And they were associating with this militia movement in Las Vegas, like I said, the southern tip of Nevada, the northwest area of Arizona. And so my partner and myself were sent to that area to try to investigate this militia crowd and find out what the remnants of McVeigh's associations were. And so we crossed paths with this anti-government crowd, and we crossed paths with some crazy characters, man. People that were talking about poisoning water supplies, taking over, like ambushing a National Guard unit to try to obtain military weapons, attacking the Hoover Dam and trying to disrupt the power supply, attacking the Palo Verde nuclear power plant and trying to create chaos. And so, we crossed paths with some true believers that they were intending to, like I said, create chaos, disrupt the government, and there's some wild plans and some wild people in that crowd.
But were they kind of, the way you describe it, in the one you talk about your first meeting with them, and one lady shows up with her baby, with her gun, and like who are these people that want to, kind of, again, basically wreak havoc on the United States?
Well, they were very much common men and common women who were frustrated with the activity of the government and intended to do something about it. We went to training events where explosive devices were being detonated and target practice was being executed with this group of like misfits almost.
Yeah. Because you and your partner were far better trained than anybody in that particular group, right? Like there's one, again, you described this one scenario in your book where you and your partner have to kind of run the gauntlet. And I think they're pretty shocked at how effective you are in actually getting through this gauntlet to supposedly pass to get into the group and maybe move on to the next level.
Well, there was an event during this investigation where there was a group that we got closest to that was calling themselves the Nevada Volunteers, and they were part of this Operation Chaos. And so they set up this training exercise for us in the desert. It was a confidence course like that you would see a law enforcement or a military training event. We went into this canyon, and in the canyon were different mannequins, like department store mannequins, set up in different scenarios, hidden. We had to snake our way through this. And Vince and myself, we were going through this confidence course fast. We had been through training. We knew what we were doing, and we were putting, we were triple tapping everything we saw. 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. Every mannequin that we went through, we were blowing up everybody. And so we get to the end of it, and these people that were testing us, that were challenging us to see if we had the right stuff to be part of the Nevada Volunteers, like their critique was, man, you guys killed everything. Everything you encountered, you killed it. And we were like, man, that's who we are. I thought that's what we were about. And then they were like kind of stepped back and said, okay, well, we'll talk about this and we'll evaluate whether you qualify to be part of our group. And I remember Vince was like, hey, that's bullshit. You guys run this confidence course. We'll decide if we want to be with you. We just showed what we're about. We just showed what we're capable of. We don't know if you guys can do it. And he turned the table on them. And that was a pretty powerful move.
Well, Vince seems like a total character, because the other scenario you describe in your book, Jay, is when you guys show up and there's a coyote.
We were at this same training event, and we're in this like isolated, like it was like a lunar landscape almost out there in the desert in Nevada, and everyone's popping off rounds, and a coyote pops out of a little foxhole and is trying to make its escape. And Vince just draws down and empties his mag and reloads and shoots another mag at this coyote. So these guys who are talking about taking over America come to me on the side, pull me aside, and they said, man, you got to check your partner, man. That dude's bloodthirsty. That dude, he's dangerous, and he's out of control. And so, like, my first response to them was like, you guys want to take over the government, but there's a guy taking pot shots at a coyote that's scared you?
Well, the other thing, and the other thing that I was really surprised on in the undercover world is and you just alluded to this, is that when situations arise, it's not like you're trying to de-escalate. You're almost trying to like re-escalate. And push it up even further, to turn the temperature up even further, I guess, with the hopes maybe that things will then simmer down. But the approach there to do that, like, again, is that thought out where, it's not, oh, hey, you know what, I'll put my gun away, get it. It's like, hey, look, like, we're going to crank this up even further and show these guys and girls who we really are. And that's just part of the strategy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in that scenario, like, we were being asked to prove ourselves, and so we had to show like the tactical skills that we were worthy, but also the mentality. But that there's a fine line there, because entrapment is always an issue, is always a defense, that you lured a suspect into a crime that they wouldn't normally be willing to commit. So you've got to be careful with that. Also, outrageous government conduct. Like, as a cover operator, you can't be worse than the defendant in the case. You're going to be in a courtroom at some point, and some defense attorney is going to say the agent that's testifying against my client is worse than my client. Right, so there's a very fine line to walk there. Ultimately, in that case, our method and our approach and the way we conducted ourselves paid off. We crossed paths with a guy named Jeffrey Tenpenny, who brought us into his personal scheme, where he was intending to blow up 3 Las Vegas casinos. Yeah. He had a personal dispute, and he wanted to disguise it as Oklahoma City Part 2. He wanted to disguise his personal problems as another militia lone wolf attack. And so he let us in on this scheme to blow up the Mirage, the Treasure Island, and the Gold Nugget casinos. He had blueprints of the hotels. We did walkthroughs with him where he showed us where he wanted the devices placed. He ordered the devices. He ordered C4 devices from us that he wanted disguised as common items. He wanted one disguised as a briefcase. He wanted another disguised as a picnic cooler that he could set off remotely. And we ultimately, our explosives technology branch, built the devices to Tenpenny's specifications, and then we sold him those devices with his intent that he was going to use them on these casinos. And going back to the entrapment, we said, man, are you sure you want to do this? Potentially thousands of people are going to be killed. Grandmas and grandpas and babies are going to be there when these devices go off. And he pulled his shirt aside, and he had a tattoo on his chest that was a heart, and it was colored in black. And he said, you see that? I have a black heart. I don't care who dies. I don't care how many people die. And Vince asked him, what are you going to get for this? If we get caught in this scheme, what's going to happen? And he's like, man, they're going to fry us. They're going to execute us. And I'm not afraid.
How do you think a person like that ends up in that spot, Jay? where they literally don't care about, women and babies and things like that. About, like, did it all start the day they were born and they just grew up in the wrong environment? Again, you talk about your upbringing, your dad, the respect you had for him, the importance of, how you were raised, and how that, again, kind of formed your core values as you progressed in your career. Now you take somebody like this. How do they end up like this?
Well, and I think we see it every day now with these mass shootings, school shootings. We have such a huge mental health problem in our country, and
yeah.
these people who are mentally ill feel like they can play out their fantasies or make their name or do whatever their motivation is. I think as lawmen, there's no crystal ball that says what you do today, the work you put in today, what it potentially might prevent tomorrow. So with Jeffrey Tenpenny, we foiled his scheme to blow up those casinos. Who knows if he had crossed paths with different people or had actually executed that plan, what would have happened? That's all speculative. Yeah. If someone had intervened on Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris before they enacted their play at Columbine High School, what might have happened? We don't know that. We know what the end result was. And that is why, as lawmen and women, with no crystal ball, you just go out every day and you do your job the very best you can. And you do it in the face of this movement to get rid of the police and defund the police and depower the police. In today's world, the job has never been harder than it is today. And
absolutely.
You have lawmen and women who their alarm clock goes off in the morning and they put their feet on the ground and they pour their kids a bowl of Cheerios and they have a cup of coffee with their husband or wife and they leave their families with no guarantee they're ever going to see their wives or husbands or kids again, and they go into that environment to guarantee other families so that they can see their loved ones again. And they go into that environment knowing that they're hated, knowing that they're despised. They're being ambushed and spit on and attacked and ridiculed and videotaped. And they go anyways. They still go to try to keep the rest of us safe.
I agree. Well said. I totally agree with you. It is an incredibly difficult job. And with any profession, there's going to be the 1%ers who, end up on the front page of there's going to be, in any profession, there's going to be the 1% of people who do it the wrong way. You know what I mean? And that's the same in any profession. The only difference in like law enforcement is that the stakes are so high and the risk and what you're doing is so important that those 1%ers can end up on the front page of the newspaper. Whereas in my field, the 1%er might end up in jail, might lose his designation, but he's probably or she's probably not ending up on the front page of the newspaper. But in your situation, those same 1%ers, it's a totally different ballgame. You know what I mean? And because in any field, there's going to be the 1% that, they just shouldn't be there. You know what I mean?
For every event that comes off the rails, for every George Floyd type scenario that rightfully gets attention, that is incorrectly handled, and where law enforcement does harm, and they do happen occasionally, sometimes through mistakes, sometimes through bad intent. Those situations do happen, but for every one of those, there's tens of thousands of law enforcement encounters that take place on that same day that are resolved and de-escalated and handled peacefully that no one gives anybody any credit for.
100%. 100% agree with you. 100% agree. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. Now you move on to masterclass, is what I would call it, as being Hell's Angels. maybe give some people some perspective of, what is the Hell's Angels? What are the Hell's Angels, and why are they a target area for law enforcement? Clearly, these guys are not planning to blow up casinos. I don't think that's their game plan. That's not, they're not going to do that. But they were a target of law enforcement. Give people, just some perspective on the background of the Hell's Angels.
Well, they insist on calling themselves or characterizing themselves as a club, as this fun-loving group of rascals who enjoy the brotherhood of riding motorcycles together, but don't want to live by society's rules and laws. The reality of it is, and this is, I'll give them that. That's your mantra. That's your position. Their position is that they're not a gang. They're a club that has criminal elements within their club. Okay. The truth is that they are an international organized crime syndicate. The Hells Angels have, nearly 5,000 members, nearly 500 charters across, they're in 60 different countries. They're on every continent. One of their mantras is, the sun never sets on a Hells Angels patch. They're everywhere. And like I said earlier, these guys have their PhDs in violence and intimidation. Is every Hells Angel that's got a death head on his vest a murderer or a rapist or a gun runner or a drug dealer? No, they're not. But they have those elements within their club, within their gang, and as law enforcement, we have to pay attention.
Yeah. And is there one aspect of what they do or what they're alleged to do that really is it the guns? Is it the drugs? What's the one thing that really puts them high on the radar to keep an eye on?
Well, I think those things that you mentioned, in our case, in the case that we ran that was centered in Arizona, they were acting violently and with impunity, no one was paying attention. Two key events that took place during our investigation of the Hells Angels in Arizona was the Harrah's Casino riot, which was in April of 2002, I believe. The Hells Angels and the Mongols motorcycle gang, big rivals, blood rivals, got into a massive riot, shootout, stab out, beat out, at the Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, Nevada. I had an undercover house right across the Colorado River in Arizona from the Laughlin, Nevada Harrah's Casino. I'd met with Hells Angels that day. I was with the Hells Angels that night of the riot.
Yeah, wow.
They were shooting and stabbing and beating and killing each other in public under hundreds of closed-circuit television cameras. So the world was able to see how they act. Another case that was super important for us was I kind of planted my flag and started to establish myself in the Hells Angels Mesa, Arizona charter. That charter, members of that charter, brought a woman to their clubhouse, a lady named Cynthia Garcia. She had 5 or 6 kids. She showed up to party with the Hells Angels and have fun. She made the fatal mistake of insulting them, in their house, in front of their members. And in retaliation for that, they beat her down. They boot stomped her to the brink of death, on the floor of the Mesa clubhouse. Then they wrapped her up in some carpet, stuffed her in the trunk of a car, and drove her to the desert outside of Mesa in Apache Junction and cut her head off. That is what they felt was an appropriate response to them being insulted. So, we get the complaint from the Hells Angels, from the one percenter outlaw biker world, Like, why are you investigating us? There's all kinds of crime. There's all kinds of events going on in the world that deserve your attention. Well, those events deserve our attention too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how does the process start with the Hells Angels? Obviously, you just can't walk into the clubhouse and say, hey, I'm Jay Bird. Start dealing with me. How does that trust start to build up with the Hells Angels?
Yeah, it's very slow and it's very methodical. It's frustrating at times. You don't knock on a charter door and say, hey, where's the application? I want to apply for membership. It starts off slow. You have to expose yourself. You have to get on the X, what we were talking about earlier, and then try to stay on the X. It starts off slow through an association, and then you try to grow that. Ultimately, if people in the gang see that they feel that like maybe you have a future, you're asked to hang around, which is an official club title, a hang around. You're hanging around the members, and you're deciding if club life is right for you, and they're deciding if they want to allow you to stay around. Then from a hang around, you go to a prospect, which is a prospective member. When I got my prospect patch, I was told, you're a member without his patch. All our rules, all our protocols, all our procedures, all our bylaws apply to you. You're a representation of the Hells Angel. You just haven't been fully vetted. And in that prospect phase, that's where the vetting comes. That you're being test driven. For an extended period of time, I was nothing more than a step and fetch for the Hells Angels. I had to be where they said, when they said, do what they asked, be prepared, and trying to show that I had the right stuff to ultimately wear their patch.
Don't you worry too that, again, you're not a single guy at this point, who, you've got a family at home. Don't you worry at some point that one of these folks from the Hells Angels is going to follow you home and see, well, Jay Bird is actually not Jay Bird, he's actually Jay Dobyns, and what would stop them from doing that? Like that just seems, if they're so paranoid, I just don't know why they wouldn't do that and say, hey, let's just actually see what Jay does on the weekends. You know what I mean? And follow him home, and then all of a sudden they'd be shocked at saying, well, what's all this situation? Well,
part of the tradecraft is not being followed home, is cleaning yourself and making sure that you don't have a tail. Is that a perfect science? It's not. There was an event where I actually did cross paths with a Hells Angel while I was undercover, and I had my daughter with me. But my backstory was that I was divorced. I had some kids. And I was very well backstopped. The Hells Angels, on at least 2, maybe 3 occasions, put a private investigator on me to find out who is Jay Davis. And so the private investigator, my backstopping, ATF had done such a wonderful job of backstopping me that when the private investigator came back to the Hells Angels and reported on me, that private investigator was telling the Hells Angels exactly what I had told them. So their private investigators were enhancing my credibility.
I see.
They were repeating what I said. They were confirming what I said independently. And what's the process? How long does it take to go from being a prospect or starting at the beginning to being a fully patched member of the Hells Angels? Like, this is, again, like you say, this is not a 1-week process where you put in your resume and, it goes through, you do a couple of job interviews and off you go. This is a long process that's quite involved. Well, with a lot of 1%er motorcycle clubs, that prospecting phase, in some lasts 60, 90 days where they're prospecting you, testing you before you get your patch. The Hells Angels standard is severe. A minimum mandatory of 365 days that you have to serve as a prospect before you're even eligible to be considered as a member. And that's how they insulate themselves. It's smart on their part. their mentality is that a cop can't keep up with us, can't live our lifestyle at the speed and pace that we live it for a year before we're able to figure out who they are. We were able to shortcut some of that and circumvent some of that and accelerate that process. But still, the Hells Angels case I was involved in was a 2-year investigation. And that was like every day, 12, 16, 18, 20-hour days, day after day, month after month, year after year.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. Couple of fun things here from your book, Jay. A couple of things that stuck out to me that I want to get your perspective on. So there's 3 issues or 3 points that I'd like to bring up here. You have several pictures in your book of you flashing the middle finger. And I didn't do the math, Jay, but I would say maybe about half the pictures in your book are of you and your crew flashing the middle finger. Now, again, my theory on this was again, you were Jay Bird. I don't know, flashing the bird, if that was but what's the thing with the middle finger? Is like every picture, it seemed like when you're undercover, you were flashing the middle finger. What's the deal with the middle finger?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree that there's that many pictures in the book flying the bird. There's a few, and I don't really think it had any significance other than attitude.
I see.
Like these are like the pictures in the book are pictures that were being taken while we're operational, and that's that's part of the attitude that we were presenting in role, in character.
The next thing that really surprised me in the book, obviously you spend a lot of time, the Hells Angels spend a lot of time partying, and enjoying themselves. Now, in terms of choice of alcohol, I would have thought it would be some serious beer of choice. And, the one that I actually Googled myself there's one called Snake Venom. Got about a 67.5% alcohol in it. However, in your case, it would appear that your beer of choice is actually Coors Light. That was the beer of choice in several situations. So I wasn't sure. Again, my theory on this one was, at least then you can probably drink a lot more if it's a light beer before getting drunk. But is it just you enjoyed the Coors Light, Jay? Is that the choice for the Coors Light?
To be honest with you, I was never a good drinker.
I see.
That was never my thing. I was never a dope guy. And so the objective is actually to not get drunk, to not get intoxicated, so that you have your wits about you, you have your senses, you can report back and remember things you said and heard and saw and did. One of the techniques I used when these guys would start banging shots, there was no way I was going to keep up with these guys drinking. And if I did, I would have created a dangerous environment for myself and for my partners and for the people that were working for me. But I would get like a dark colored beer bottle, like an amber beer bottle. And when they'd pass shots out, I would chase my shot with a beer. The reality of it is I was spitting that shot back into the beer bottle. And then I'd every once in a while have to go into the men's room and empty out my beer bottle and pour the whiskey or the tequila into the toilet. And that's, part of the game.
Well, and I would have thought on the Hells Angels side, they want to get you drunk, right? They want to get you drunk, and let's see what he says when he's drunk. Because you're not going to be, you're not going to be thinking straight. So I can imagine trying to, same thing, you talk a lot in your book about your undercover girlfriend. Like I can just imagine the dance that you're trying to maintain with that undercover girlfriend, and making this look real, yet it's not real. It's fictional. Right?
Well, I had several undercover partners in the case. Like I said earlier, we never accomplished anything alone. I had some amazing undercover partners that were side by side with me. We had a task force with a dozen lawmen and women doing various tasks and jobs as part of our operation. One of which was we brought in a female undercover agent, an agent named Jenna McGuire, who had just recently graduated the academy. and wanted to try, wanted to see what her contribution would be. The experts were telling Jenna, this is unsurvivable for a woman. You will not make it through this case. You're a goldfish in a shark tank. You know, you're surrounded by piranhas in this world. This is a male-dominated world, and they did everything they could to discourage her. What they did is they sadly underestimated how courageous she was. Jenna was absolutely fearless. She had balls, you know, and she took no shit from anybody during the case. She conducted herself with integrity and with dignity, and she won their respect. She proved everybody wrong.
No, that's amazing. Her story is another one that really sticks out in the book as another ATF agent who, because again, like you're alluding to, the Hells Angels, this isn't equal opportunity. The women were treated much differently than the men in the Hells Angels organization.
It'd be, as a female in that world, and then trying to like maintain your cover as an agent, really hard. Jenna probably had the hardest task in our case, just because of being a female. But she just performed so remarkably well. She set such a high standard. And like I said earlier, man, she proved everybody wrong. She proved, no, you know what? Like, a woman can do this. I'm super proud of her. I'm super proud of her accomplishments and her career.
So the third thing that stuck out to me, Jay, going through your book, and you do talk a little bit about this in the book. Now, if we go back to Donnie Brasco and the mafia, you know, his dinners and lunches are filled at, you know, expensive Italian restaurants, and you know this, you know, high priced wine and all this other sort of stuff. In your case, though, the meeting spot of place would seem to be the Waffle House. And perhaps you can like fill us in on what is the appeal of the Waffle House. Is it the coffee? Is it the waffles? Now, there's a lot of them in the U.S. They're a very successful organization, but you could almost be a speaker person for the Waffle House. You probably ate there more than anywhere. But what's the appeal of the Waffle House?
Well, to back up just a little bit, I never caught those glamour roles. I never had a Rolex on or drove, you know, a nice car. That was just, it didn't fit the character I played, right? I was always envious of those the guys that were able to play that role and the privilege that came with that. No less dangerous, but just a different vibe to those guys that played that type of character. The Waffle House, both before and after the Hells Angels case, was a favorite spot of mine. There's one fairly simple reason, is they're all built the same. They all have the same architecture. They all have the same structure to them. They replicate that. So you know exactly where everything's at. You know where all the escapes are. No matter what Waffle House you go to, it's laid out the exact same way.
Interesting.
3/4 of the building is wrapped in windows. So your cover team can keep a pretty good eye on you, versus some enclosed location where they're entirely relying on your transmitter.
I see. Interesting. That makes total sense. Last point on this is we've got a lot of finance people who'd be listening to the call. And, you know, the finance people are probably thinking, man, this is a cool gig. Is there any role for finance in Undercover in the Hells Angels? Do they play any part of the role, or is finance, I'm sure they do their taxes, and, you know, you talk about how they actually have to generate revenue through selling merchandise and stuff like that. Do accountants play a role, Jay, or we're not part of the equation?
Well, you know, everything in the criminal world is driven behind money. No, everything everybody's doing is typically got a financial aspect to it. These guys are the masters of churning clean money, legitimate money. They've taken this enterprise and they sell all kinds of swag. And they're diversified. they're invested in real estate, and they have clean money associated with their club, with their gang as well. So I think there's always a financial aspect to crime. I think you look at Bob Musella's case that was featured in the movie The Infiltrator. His entire undercover role was that of a money launderer. And that financial aspect had a huge value to Pablo Escobar and the Colombian cocaine traffickers, and he played it, exceptionally well.
And if we get to the end of the Hell's Angels experience, are you maybe just give some perspective on how it ended? And are you happy, several years later now, are you happy with the way it ended? And I guess, was the risk worth the reward at the end of the day?
Well, ultimately, the Hell's Angels investigation that I was involved in wrapped up in a very traditional way with indictments, arrest warrants, search warrants. I think numbers-wise, I think ultimately we indicted 55 members and associates. 16 we had charged with RICO crimes, to include murder, gun running, narcotics trafficking, all these things. What was very frustrating for me was after the case concluded, there was disputes on the government side as to how to deliver that case into the courtroom. What would or would not be released in the discovery process. And because of those disputes, we ended up offering plea deals and dismissing charges. And like the good guys, we couldn't stay out of our own way to see that prosecution through. The Operation Black Biscuit, which I was a part of, based on evidence, testimony, recordings, all those things that we use to deliver a case into a courtroom, that case is every bit as prosecutable today as it was when it finished in 2003. But we got in our own way and didn't fully see, in my opinion, what the result should have been or could have been. Yeah. And you know what? That happens sometimes. It's super frustrating to spend 2 years of your life and the blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice and all the things that go into it to see it fall short of its potential. But I'll say this too. The Hells Angels have some amazing attorneys. They have amazing legal representation, and they're in court all the time. They're very difficult to achieve prosecutions on.
Yeah. And this, now we're going to get into the part where it gets a little bit dark, frankly. And especially in your second book, you really go into this. And this is where, again, things turn from, laughing and surprise to, it's much darker. And that's when you start to transition out of this role. And I guess my first question would be, we once had a Navy SEAL on the program, and we were talking about transitioning from being a Navy SEAL to life in, as a civilian or normal life. And the way the Navy SEAL put it was, it's like trying to jump off a moving freight train. The way another one put it was, it's like pulling the parking brake on your car when you're going 100 miles an hour. Like I can imagine it's quite a transition. What is that transition like, Jay? Is that a fair representation? Because I can imagine getting out of the ATF or this situation with the Hells Angels would be challenging, even just from a mental perspective.
It was, and I am not a good example of a smooth transition. One of the complaints against me, about me, from my supervisors, from the executives, was this guy can't get out of role. And I resisted that for a long time. After the Hells Angels case ended, man, I was still pushing the envelope. I was doing home invasion cases and still working undercover in different areas. That lifestyle, like living that lie and that world of deception and the risk that was involved in it, that was my heroin. I needed it. I needed that fix. yeah. So I didn't transition well out of that. I didn't just turn it off and say, okay, let's call it a career. I was always pushing the envelope. I would not have wanted to be my boss. I would not have wanted to supervise me because I was so hyper risk aggressive that I was a challenge to manage.
Do you miss it even today, Jay? Is there a part of you that says, man, I wish I could go back and get that, that adrenaline run, trying to keep the hand steady when the stress and the fear and everything is overwhelming you? Do you miss it today, or you're kind of like saying, you know what, I'm good. I don't need that today?
Yeah, I don't miss being on the point. I don't miss the actual being an operator in those high-risk life and death situations. I'll tell you what I do miss, though. I miss the camaraderie of coming together with a group of people with a mission in front of you, with an objective in front of you, and then trying to capitalize on all those different people's skill sets and bring it together to build a case. I miss that.
Yeah.
The most important things to me in my career were not the cases, were not the statistics of it. It was the people. People are always the most important thing.
The other thing, again, you get into in your book is your relationship today with the ATF. I'm going to use an analogy. Austin Matthews. Obviously, you know Austin Matthews. He's born and raised in the state of Arizona, and now he's up in Toronto, and we've adopted him as one of our own up here in Toronto. We love Austin Matthews. The kids all want to be him, and the adults are all our hockey fans. Probably, we say we don't want to be him, but in behind closed doors, we want to be Austin Matthews. There's no doubt about that. Austin Matthews will probably never have to buy another meal in Toronto for as long as he lives, and if he ever wins a Stanley Cup while he's in Toronto, he will never have to pay for a flight. They will be flying him up on some sort of a golden jet. To me, that is how you treat a Hall of Famer like Austin Matthews. Your relationship, Jay, to me, you are a Hall of Famer within the ATF. You should be, frankly, an example for young kids coming in about, like you say, all the good that can be done. But that is not, and this is, again, one of the areas that's quite jaw-dropping in the book, that is not the relationship you have with the ATF. It was kind of a messy exit from the ATF.
Well, with regards to Austin, I love the fact that he's a U.S. born and bred, an Arizona kid who found the highest levels of perfection in professional hockey. That's pretty cool for us.
Absolutely, in the desert. And Arizona should be incredibly proud of Austin Matthews. Absolutely, no, and he's the captain of the Leafs. 100%. And like I said, he will never have to buy another meal in Toronto for as long as he lives.
Well,
but why doesn't the ATF treat you the same way, Jay? You're a Hall of Famer within the ATF. To me, it should be the same situation, is that you should be put up on a pedestal, all of the guys you mentioned, and really be looked upon as shining examples of all of the great work that can be done within the ATF if you put your mind to it.
Well, before I fully answer that, let me say this. I love ATF. I love the men and women with their boots on the ground who are out there trying to make a difference, who go to work with a purpose, who are trying to keep us safe. And the good bosses that supervise them. I love and admire them. I always have. That never changed. Regardless of how they may have tried to characterize me, that has always been my mentality. You talked about Pete Furselli. Pete had, a rough go. Pete loves ATF. Pete loves the mission and the people that are trying to execute it.
Yep.
Where I ran into a buzzsaw was when the Hells Angels learned that Jay Davis, the gun runner, debt collector, contract killer, was actually Jay Dobyns, an ATF agent. The tiger doesn't change its stripes, man. The death threats came, and they had issued a contract on me, and the contract was farmed to the Aryan Brotherhood and to the MS-13, to 18th Street Gang in Los Angeles. There was lone wolves that were experimenting, looking at it. The death and violence threats went beyond me. They extended to my wife and my kids.
That's scary.
And ATF and the people that were supervising me wanted to ignore that. I pushed back on their ignorance. And that was the fatal flaw. Like, they weren't used to people pushing back. They had done what they did to me to other agents who absorbed it and weathered the storm. And I was like, fuck it, like, I'm not fucking taking this. They should have known better. They knew that I was going to fight back. Like, all I'd ever done, all I'd ever really ever been good at was standing up to a bully. And I just had a new set of bullies to stand up to. The problem is that the people that were managing me were also in the middle of an ATF operation which became known as ATF's Fast and Furious. And they were allowing thousands of guns to be trafficked to the cartels in Mexico, knowing that that is exactly the opposite of what we stand for, of what we're supposed to do. So these supervisors that I was under their control because I was in Arizona and this case was being run out of Arizona, man, they were above the law, or believed they were above the law. They were beyond corrupt. They were criminals. And when I pushed back, the agency pushed back harder. And that's a tough fight. When you're by yourself and you're fighting the Department of Justice and all their resources, man, they ran right over the top of me and kept going. ATF has airbrushed me out of the yearbook. I'm completely irrelevant.
I'm going to go back to the sports. I'm going to go back to the sports analogy. Just again, it's obviously totally different. I'm not trying to say a sports analogy is the same as what you're doing. It's completely different. But again, I just like it because it simplifies things. The Toronto Maple Leafs have had challenges with some of their former players in terms of people who have been great and have wanted nothing to do with the Leafs after they left for whatever reason. And the Leafs work at trying to amend those relationships and make it better and bring them back. And when they bring them back to the Scotiabank Centre, the place erupts when they see them there. You know what I mean? Like they love it. Everybody loves that. Why doesn't the ATF do that, Jay? I just don't. It doesn't make sense to me that, there's so much upside to bring someone like you back and talk about it and again put you in front of kids and things like that. Why isn't that on the table?
Well, the emphasis of when I speak and when I do my training, it's never about my dispute with ATF. I'm always flattering of ATF and try to flatter the work that we do, that I did, that my partners accomplished. So when I pushed back against ATF and said, this is wrong, like, me and my family deserve an investigation of these threats. We deserve, So let me back up just a little bit. When Joe Pistone was revealed to be an FBI agent, there were threats issued against Joe. The FBI sat down with the 5 crime families in New York and said, you need to understand something. Our guy is off limits. Yeah. Like, do not touch him. Do not threaten him. ATF never took that play out of the playbook. They told me, you're on your own. Where are we going to start? Where do you want us to start with this? You figure it out. And so when I pushed back, they doubled down on me and they unmasked all my backstopping. They were going to make a power play. They were going to show who was in charge. So they made all my personal information open source so anybody could find it. Wow. 3 months after they unmasked me, my house was burned to the ground. Arsonists burned my house to the ground. There were real-time, valid, credible leads that the Hells Angels had their fingers in the arson of my house. They tripled down on me, and these same corrupt supervisors built a task force with the design, with the mission, with the mantra to frame me as the arsonist of my own house. And in doing so, they're accusing me of being someone who was willing to murder his own family, his own wife and his kids by fire.
To promote your book. Like that's just, it's almost so ridiculous that someone would actually say that. Like that just seems like, it just seems like such a silly, stupid thing to say. That Jay's book's coming out, therefore he's going to burn down his house to promote it.
Well,
that just seems insanity. Like that, honestly, just insanity.
I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to give up. They should have known that about me. And I took them to court, and we went to a trial. And ultimately, they quadrupled down on me because they shredded documents and lied and perjured themselves in court. It didn't matter because ultimately all the allegations I made were proven in a trial, in a 3-week trial. So on the surface, I won and was vindicated, if nothing else, by saying, hey, look, this is what they did, and they were found dirty in it. DOJ appealed that trial court ruling. The appellate court did not touch the facts and evidence. The appellate court said, yes, ATF did these things. They're wrong. They got caught with their pants down. But we're overturning the trial court because there is no law that says ATF has to protect you. They didn't violate any law. There's nothing that says they have to defend you. So what did they do wrong by not defending you? So that's all that, the fight, the Hells Angels ran right over the top of me and kept going. ATF ran right over the top of me and kept going. Both of them, the Hells Angels and ATF and the federal government, the machine does not care about the individual. It's too big. It's going to keep moving. Those machines are steamrollers. And if you're not smart enough to get out of the way, you're going to be crushed right into the asphalt.
Yeah.
And I wasn't smart enough to get out of the way of either of them.
It's an injustice, yeah. It's and the other thing you talk about in your book is that, which is shocking actually, is that there's no equivalent of the witness protection program for any law enforcement agents. Is that it is fair game?
There isn't. The example I use is Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was a member of the Gambino crime family, who was John Gotti's right-hand man, who we know was responsible or had a hand in at least 17 murders.
Yeah.
He decides he's going to cooperate with the government and give testimony. Sammy gets put in the witness protection program. He gets witness security. But lawmen, there is no program for that. Not that it would have worked for me. I'm not saying like I should have been in witness security, but there is no mechanism for that. And I'm not the first one to suffer from it. I brought attention to it with my fight, with my dispute, which alienated me from a lot of the people in ATF, even people who probably supported me. Was like, dude, you're airing our dirty laundry. And I'm like, man,
yeah.
If I don't, I'm empowering them to keep doing this to the next guy.
Yeah, what was also surprising in your book is you have this section at the end that where are they now, right? And when you read a lot about your friends in the ATF, they're kind of similar. Some of them are similar spots to you, where they're in disputes. With the ATF. It's just very sad that for all of the good work that all of you, guys and girls have done, it shouldn't end like that. It's not right. And again, if you go back to my sports analogy, it never would. So what's the difference? You know what I mean? Well, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, and I think we look at it from this very big picture, perfect world. Life's not fair. It's just not. Fair is where you go to ride a roller coaster and eat cotton candy. There is no such thing as fair in life. What happened to me wasn't fair, but it is what it is. Guess what? It's not fair. So what? Life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And
You're
so
right.
I'm not bitter. I'm not pissed off. I'm not angry. I'm not burning for anybody. There's people that, intended harm on me. There's people that enacted harm on me. I have internally, personally forgiven anybody that had bad intentions for me. And that's how I maintain my peace of mind. And I live a happy life.
Yeah.
I don't walk around pissed off. There's nothing to be gained from that.
Any regrets at the end of the day, Jay? Would you look back and say, man, you know what, maybe I should have taken that on that Monday I started. On the Thursday, it didn't go very well. Maybe I should have returned one of those calls from those lawyers, and you know what, you'd be in Barbados, sipping margaritas, as opposed to, where things are. You know what I mean? Is there any regrets at the end of the day?
Well, I get asked, like, would you do it? You like go from that being shot the first week on the job, the second shooting in Chicago, the risk, the drama, the battle damage, the hurt I put on my wife and kids, my dispute with ATF, falling out of favor with ATF, basically becoming public enemy number one at ATF for pushing back. Would you do it again? Yes, I would do it again. But in hindsight, I would be better. I know where my mistakes were. I know where my failures were. I know where I got things wrong. I would do it cleaner. I would do it better. But I ask myself the question, I ask you the question, or anybody that would present that to me. If me or people like me aren't going to do it, then who is going to stand up? Like, is your dentist going to stand up? Is your mechanic? Is your next door neighbor? Somebody has to take a stand.
Absolutely. And you have to be a special personality in order to do that. To think again that somebody's going to put themselves in the X, operate the way they do, and then when they exit, everything is just going to be quote unquote hunky-dory. It doesn't work like that. You can't have it both ways. The people that do what you do, they're special people. You know what I mean? It's not, they're different. You know what I mean? Like, to deal with that high stress, high fear, you're dialed differently, Jay. You just are. You know what I mean? And when things exit, to think it's all just going to wrapped up in a nice bow, that's just not how it works.
Well, I'll say this, Scott. I've turned or tried to turn some of these bad events into something good. I always had faith in my life. When I was undercover for a big section of my life, my only prayer was, God, find the most evil person that you can and put me in his or her path and let me see what I can do about it. And then I rested on Psalm 23:4. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because God is with me. And that is how I conducted myself. So I had a faith-based life. But much of the way that I was living my life didn't reflect that. And so the good part is that it renewed my faith. It cleared my faith. It's brought me closer to God. And I know that God's got a perfect plan for me. I don't always understand what it is. But I'm trying to now live the life that I feel good about and not one that creates regret.
Well, and we talked about this earlier. I sure hope the ATF has read your second book, because things almost ended very badly. You talk again, things got very dark, and if it wasn't for your phone call with one of your kids talking about a mohawk, things we might not be talking here today. You know what I mean? And I can't imagine if that happened, someone would look at that and say, well, yeah, that's a good outcome. You know what I mean? That's a horrific outcome. That should never happen to one of our guys.
The things that happened to me, not so much through my career operationally or with the Hells Angels, the things that happened to me in my dispute with ATF caused me to question everything that I believed in, everything that I felt like I stood for. Like, I felt like I stood behind a purpose. I was flawed on that path. I made mistakes on that path. But it caused me to step back and reset and said, man, like, all the things that you believed in, fucking counterfeit, man.
Yeah. And that's a scary thing to realize. That's your life's work at the end of the day. 27 years, right? 27 years, the vast majority of your working life. Yeah. Here's another question for you, Jay. Your kids come to you and say, hey, Dad, thinking of pursuing a career in the ATF. What do you tell them? you obviously not going to go back and change it. You had what you had. What's the advice you tell your kids if they were to come to you and ask you that question?
I love ATF. For the most part, I had an amazing career and amazing experiences. I'm not even sure I call it a career. I have a very good friend, a partner of mine, an undercover partner of mine named Louis Quinones, and he says, dude, we didn't have careers. We had odysseys. And that's probably a better characterization of, top to bottom, beginning to end, what it was. I think it's very difficult to be a lawman or a lawwoman today. It takes a very special person. If my kids wanted to pursue that, I think it is a good pursuit, and I would support it. But they have seen firsthand, what the potential consequences and outcomes are. And so, I wouldn't discourage them, but I definitely wouldn't push them in that direction either.
Yeah. And how do you spend your life today, Jay? You're obviously a busy guy. You went into being like a high school football coach, and you've done a series for A&E, and you've got all this stuff going on. What's the typical day in the life of Jay? Is there another book in the pipe? Is there a big project? What's a day in the life of Jay Dobyns today, or is it just hanging with the family? Is that kind of what you enjoy to do? What's a day in the life of Jay?
My coaching high school football was hugely satisfying for me. It was a completely different world, and I was able to interact with young people and try to, in essence, teach them life through football, and hopefully learn some football along the way. I don't intend to write anymore. Writing is not easy for me. It's at least the stories that I told were painful to recapture. There was probably a therapeutic element to it, but it was super hard for me. I've been involved in some entertainment projects, which are fun at times, frustrating at times. I do training. I give training to law enforcement groups and to corporate groups, and try to translate my story to the audience, good and bad. Probably what I do enjoy being around my family and trying to repair that battle damage and trying to be a better husband and a better father than I was in the past. At 63 years old, I'm trying to teach myself how to play golf, which is super frustrating, super challenging. I had success as an athlete. There's nothing like having a little ball sitting in front of you, sitting still and trying to hit it straight, that will convince you how unathletic you are.
Well, the other thing with golf is that you're just competing against yourself. It's an individual sport at the end of the day, right? But I can imagine knowing how you conducted yourself on the football field, transitioning to a golf course, Jay. That would be quite the transition.
I'm never going to be a great golfer. I'm never going to probably even be a good golfer. But the challenge of trying to improve and the work ethic it takes I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah. Well, Jay, we've gone way over here. I just wanted to say thank you very much. It was a pleasure having this discussion. It was a pleasure reading your books. I thoroughly enjoyed both of them, and I would highly encourage people to. You can't just read one; you got to read both. Especially if you've read the first one, you got to read the second one. It answers a lot of questions from the first one. It talks about how things end. But Jay, thank you very much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Your audience, go be amazing. Go put your dent in the universe. Love your God, love your families, love your friends, love your partners, but make sure you take care of yourself along the way.
Great advice. I could not agree with that anymore. No, thank you, Jay.